Welcome, everybody. Tonight we are in 10 Parables by Denver Snuffer on the last chapter, chapter 10, The Missing Virtue. Tasha Larson is going to be leading the discussion for us tonight, and she has prepared a document of, I don't know if it's talking points or what. Maybe, Tasha, you can introduce that, and I'll go ahead and post it in the chat thread here so people can receive that right here. And I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, I thought you were going to give some discussion about this being the last parable, and
We'll save that for the end. I'll just give a little recap, conclusions, something or another at the end, and so take it away.
hey, great. Well, first of all, I'm excited to be here and lead this discussion. It's comforting to see all of your faces who I consider to be my friends now after 10 weeks of this. It's going to be kind of sad to not have this to look forward to every Friday. The 10th parable kind of feels some weight trying to lead a discussion, teach this parable, because there is so much here. And I think Denver has made more commentary on this parable that he's written than any other. And I think it's really kind of a roadmap for each of us in how heaven prepares us to return. And so I think there's a lot that we can take away personally that might help us if we're stuck not knowing what we need to do differently to try to be redeemed, to receive the Lord, to become part of his family. So I hope by the end we can all come away with some concrete things that maybe we could work on, because there seems to be a formula, and this parable outlines it quite well. To begin with, I'd like to just do a quick recap of the first parable, a busy young man. I think there is a lot of similarities between the first parable and the 10th parable, and even the message, I think, is about the same. The 10th parable just has a lot more meat to it. So do you all have access? There I go. Do y'all have access to the first parable? If we go through that real quick. Okay, so it starts out, a busy young man was on his way. He encountered a man sitting under a tree on the side of the road, and this man asked the young man to come and help him. First paragraph, we're running into a beggar. We have a man under a tree asking for this busy young man to come and help him. The young man noticed something compelling in this man's demeanor. We'll notice that as we go through the 10th parable. They sat under the tree braiding rope. A lot of symbolism with the tree. The cross. The tree can also represent the tree of life, a conduit to heaven. It is a way for us to connect back to heaven. Okay, so they sat together braiding rope. All right, so they kept braiding until they had enough to make the net. It took 7 years to tie the net. 7 to braid the rope, and then 7 more to tie the net. And finally, the man under the tree says, now we have enough. Do you know who I am? And the young man said, well, I didn't at first, but then I noticed the calluses in your hands, and so I have known for some time who you are. And then the master replied, do you wish anything from me? And the young man replied, no, not now. There was a time when I would have asked for more, but I'm content. And I'd like to go back to this point that I just made about the young man being content with what he had and not wanting to ask the master for more later. So with that, Unless, Adrian, you want to add anything else to the first parable?
No.
Okay, I'm going to use him as my helper here. Okay, so let's dive into the missing virtue. Chapter 10, the missing virtue. Would someone like to read the first paragraph?
I will.
Great.
Angels came to the Lord and reported there was a young man who sought to do good, who loved his wife and treated her with great affection. Not only that, when the man and his wife spoke, they shared such joy and kindness, such light and truth between them, the angels were coming to listen in to their daily discourse.
Okay, great. The very first word of this parable starts out with angels. And we've learned that there are different kinds of angels, and they might not always be what we think they are. So in the prepared material that I had Cameron post, I've got a section that's labeled angels. Would someone be willing to read the first paragraph of that? Does everyone have access to that?
I'll read it.
Okay, great.
Joseph explained that all angels either have or do, by the way, this is on page 2 of the packet she prepared. All angels either have or do belong to this earth, but there are no angels who minister to this earth, but those who do belong or have belonged to it. Their status as an angel comes from the fact that they have met with God, received their assignment and authority from him, and deliver only the message he instructs should be delivered. They are in his service, and the message is confined to what he has told them to do.
Okay, so a couple key points there. There are no angels who minister on this earth who have not been here before. And as we go on through the parable, I think you'll find some interesting points then in the identities of the angels. Angels minister to mankind. They confer power, light, and truth. They prepare one to receive the Lord. Neither have angels ceased to minister unto the children. Oh, I must have skipped something there. Okay, and the office of their ministry is to call men into repentance. Let's see, that they may bear testimony of him. So these angels come to help people prepare to see the Lord. All right, so let's go back to the first paragraph in the parable. And it says, there was a young man who sought to do good, who loved his wife and treated her with great affection. Not only that, when the wife and the man spoke, they shared such joy and kindness, such light and truth, that the angels were coming to listen into their discourse, their daily discourse. So the angels saw the relationship between the man and the woman. Does anyone have any comments on this? Why this would attract the attention of heaven, and that the angels would see it on earth and then go and report to the Lord? All right.
Maybe if the angels are, and maybe the angels are jealous if they're unmarried. I don't know.
They're spying on you. That's what's going on. They're spying.
Well, Denver gave this is some of the commentary I told you that I found. He said so much about this parable, and I hate to just read a whole bunch of other things tonight, but I think just to kind of get the discussion going, I'd like to read this. This is in the packet. It says Denver's commentary on the 10th parable and marriage. Could I get someone read the first paragraph of that? Please?
I can.
Okay, go ahead, Annette.
God doesn't judge righteousness the way we do. If you've read the 10th parable, what was it that attracted the attention of the angels? They looked at the marriage and they said, this looks like what we come from. This relationship, this marriage, the man and the woman, this is what heaven itself consists of. And look, it's here on the earth. And the angels go, and they bring the Lord, and they say, behold the man and the woman. And the Lord set in motion everything that was needed.
Okay, second paragraph. Do you want to keep going, Annette?
Sure. What more do you need to see from the theme of the Book of Mormon than this passage in order to realize that when it comes to the relationship of marriage, this is the image of God. This is what God would like to preserve into eternity. It is so much easier to take people who have this kind of a marriage and to preserve them into eternity than it is to take someone who may know all the mysteries, but whose marriage is a tattered ruin, and attempt to preserve them.
Okay, keep going.
And now it says in passing, they're given in marriage, and he blessed them according to these promises. Well, what's he telling us? Yeah, it's the covenant of Abraham. It's the temple marriage. He's saying that these people enter into the covenant of marriage, and as a consequence of the covenant of marriage, they realize the benefits of the promises made. And what are the promises made that you associate with the covenant of Abraham? Well, it's not just benefits that pertain to this life. It's benefits that pertain to all eternity. It's the promise of exaltation. It's the promise that you become part of the church of the firstborn. You become part of the general assembly. You become part of the citizens, not just of a society here on this earth, but a society that includes a heavenly body. And you have the right to commune with all of those that are participants in this larger organization.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you. So it was the marriage that attracted the attention of heaven, the angels, because they saw this couple that loved each other, and they saw something on earth that resembled that in heaven. And because we've kind of lost all remembrance of what heaven looks like, I thought this was a good little look into maybe what we once knew of what heaven looks like. All right, let's move on to the second paragraph in the parable. Can I get another reader?
I'll go ahead and read it.
Thanks.
The Lord said he would come and see the man and his wife for himself. So it was that the Lord came down and looked upon the young man and his wife. He found them together preparing. I'm trying to get mine. Okay, there I go. Okay, he found them together preparing a meal for their children, joking about the events of the day. Their conversation was witty, filled with mirth and insight, and great love was shared between them.
Okay, one more, Karen.
The Lord then considered the young man carefully. Excuse me. He spoke to the angels and said, "We will present this matter at the council, and you will receive word."
All right. So as I was reading this, I was like, okay, why are they going to consider the young man carefully? If it was the couple that attracted the attention of heaven, then why is it the man that they're going to consider and not the woman? I just thought it was an apt question. Does anyone have any comments on that? Any thoughts? Gosh, I got no one talking tonight.
I don't know that I've got an answer, but I've got another question, because if you go to the end, it's the young man who met the Lord and then was taken to the Father and introduced to the family. Then he came back and told his wife. So I was discussing this with my sister, and it certainly appears, and I'm open for anybody who's got insight, that the experience that a man is having here in this creation compared to the woman is very different. it appears to me that the what is expected is quite different from a man to a woman.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, John. Denver has taught us, and I don't think any of us would know or understand this unless we understood heaven more like he does, but that women and men are judged completely differently. Their roles are different. And
and it also appears in the millennium, it's going to flip. Something's going to change in the millennium. It sure appears. Denver's alluded to it many times that the female is going to become have a more predominant role, and maybe the script gets flipped in the millennium.
Right, and he's talked about in the temple, we will have a much greater understanding of the role of the woman in the eternities. And it's just something that almost can't even be talked about, it seems, at this point.
I wonder if it just highlights the man's experience because while it is necessary to have that marriage relationship, it's also necessary for each of the individuals to acquire all of the virtues needed. And it's as much the individual part of the journey and the marriage part of the journey go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other and expect to have everything that you need.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Annette. Both the man and the woman have to obtain the virtues and need to be worthy of preservation. I just wondered why in this parable it was just about the man, and the woman, it just seemed, was kind of along for the ride.
I have a thought. Perhaps the man was the one more in need of redemption. His wife was probably already there. We just had to get that man up to speed. He was too far behind his wife.
I don't know, because on the path that I'm taking, I got more than one missing virtue. So
Well, don't we all?
there's been a lot
But
of
in
that,
this,
so just saying.
And I
in
think
this case, I wonder if the man would catch up with it.
I think that you could probably write a similar parable about the young woman and her path, and the story is about the young man's path, which I think is why it centers on him. If the story were the young woman's path, then he would probably play a minor role in the story.
Oh, and I think you're right. Just opening up, asking questions that came to my mind as I was reading this. So
we don't, all our virtues, they don't all come from our marriages. Sometimes we have to learn things on our own, and as much as we try to support one another, because we're human, there's something that, like Lisa said, we're lacking something, and we don't always get that within the marriage. And so the Lord teaches us things other ways, and then we bring that back to our marriage.
I think you're exactly right, Karen. So it says, we will present this matter at the council and you will receive word. So the angels and the Lord are going to go and present this matter to the councils. It seems that the council in heaven throughout most of these parables have an important role.
I would add one other thought there. We might very well be the Lord and his companion, because he tells the angels, you'll get word, but we're going to go present this. And so I wonder if it was not the Lord ministering alone that came and spied on this man and woman.
Ooh, I like that. Very good. All right, paragraph 4. Can I have a reader?
I'll do it.
Okay.
The Lord returned from where he came and presented the matter to the council to consider. The Lord said, I have considered the case of this young man and have found his intent and desires to be perfect. He has labored long to gain light and has collected great light. However, he is lacking in one great virtue, and it will be necessary for us to intervene if the young man is to be prepared to become one with us.
All right. So he is lacking one great virtue. I'd like to read, let's see, let me find the right thing here. Never mind. We'll get to that later. Okay, so the missing virtue. I'd like y'all to think about King David as an example. King David was a man of great faith from a very young age. At age 12 or 13, 14, I can't remember the age. He was the one who had enough faith to go up against Goliath and knew that the Lord would be with him and could defeat this giant. And after that, he and the Lord gained this great relationship, and David became the Lord's servant. He became a king. But David had one that we know of, missing virtue. And it seems that one of the reasons he was sent down here was to be proved, because the Lord knows each of our weaknesses. And David succumbed and committed adultery with Bathsheba, and then killed her husband, or had him killed, and then was not allowed to build the temple. He knew that he was not in good standing with God, and spent a lot of his life in remorse, regret, and repenting. And it is most likely that when David comes back another time, he will not make the same mistake, because one of the things that he was missing, he learned. And so I think that's how it is with each of us. We all have missing virtues, and a lot of the times I think that is what we, or the thing that's the hardest for us in life. The biggest challenge we have is the thing that we beg the Lord to take away, whether it be an addiction or health issues or abuse. The list could go on and on of the difficult things that we've endured and the things that we would beg the Lord to take away. But maybe the things that we endure here are the exact things that will help us obtain the virtue that we're missing, or many of the virtues that we're missing.
It's kind of like descending below all in a certain way. I kind of look to some degree at these things from a negative perspective. In other words, he talks about the missing virtue. I would say I would try to rid myself of a natural man tendency. And then I would look at all the natural man tendencies that I would have, and then try to work on them one at a time. And as I kind of have, I've come to notice that, obeying the commandments is real important in this path. And I've come to understand that part of obeying the commandments is the Lord shining a spotlight on your issues and making them like glaring in your eyes. and you go, oh, I can see that I'm messing up there, and I need to get better at that. So, and just like Denver did, Denver saw, where he could be better at it. And then, he worked on it over a period of time. And at the end, he passed that test. But I would say that this is kind of like all our life, and it should be in all our lives. If we want to be in the family of God, that we should be going through tests to shine a light on our weaknesses, so that we can get as good as we can. I mean, sometimes you can't get perfect at it. In other words, perfectly observing that particular thing, but you can get perfect in your intent and desire to overcome that. So that's where the Lord puts in his part of it in the grace scenario. But, that's what I've experienced. There's been quite a few experiences the Lord has brought me through to identify those things that I needed to try to do better at. And, sometimes you're just crying out and saying, Lord, I don't know how you want me to do that. I'm not succeeding very well. Help me. And that's what he's looking for. He's not looking for your ability to do it as much as he is the sorrow you have for the inability that you have to do it. And that's where it's, wake up to your awful situation. And that's
no, I think you're exactly right, Lisa. And heaven does intervene. As we go on in the parable, in paragraph 6, it says, because of the Lord's recommendation, the council determined to intervene to preserve the young man and the wife. The Lord was to do all he saw fit to cause the preservation of this man and woman. And so heaven, if they set their mind to preserving a couple or a person, then they will put the circumstances in the person's lives that will help that person gain what they are missing. I know that Denver once said that when the Lord saw fit to work with him, he had way too much of this fault and not enough of all of these. And it took, a period of many, many years as the Lord worked with him to fix all of those problems.
In other words, it wasn't a missing virtue. The parable illustrates a virtue, but it was a complete remodeling, getting rid of a number of vices, amplifying a number of virtues, fixing what was wrong over the course of many, many years to get the needed result. And Denver said when he arrived at that result, he was a fundamentally very different man than he was the day he asked to know the Lord. He asked to know the Lord as a young man who had, studied this, encountered it, realized the second comforter was in fact a doctrine that was true. And by the time, it was more than 18 years, by the way. 18 is a number he picked for a reason we'll talk about, but it was many more than 18 years. And by the time he arrived there, he was a fundamentally different man than that young man who had asked.
So can we all be okay? Oh, go ahead, Cameron.
Yeah, just a clarifying question. A few minutes ago, you compared Denver renamed David to King David and his failure.
I wasn't talking about Denver renamed David. I was talking about King David in the Old Testament.
Somebody asked, are you saying Denver is King David?
Oh, no. I'm talking about the story of King David in the Old Testament, having nothing to do with Denver.
Okay, cool.
So the question I have on the topic is, I guess in some sense, seeing if you've crossed that line, or where are you at? Is it even possible in this life to correct all of the problems? Like, because sometimes I guess they can seem overwhelming, and is this just prepping me for another round, or is it possible to actually do something productive with what's left here? Or I don't know if anyone has any thoughts about that.
Hey,
Look at all of this.
I'll share something. It's kind of personal. Long story. I'll cut short. But a few years ago in my past, I'd had a very good relationship with the Lord, and I allowed my life, along with my wife, to go in a direction that was bad. It was everything the world had to offer. We went after, and I was laying in bed one morning, and I looked around and I saw the direction we were headed, and I told the Lord, I said, I know this is not where I'm supposed to be going. I'm not where I'm supposed to be, but I don't think I can stop it. I give you permission to do whatever you got to do to straighten out my course. 1 year later, I was bankrupt, unemployed, homeless, and divorced, and had to start my life all over again. I wouldn't recommend that course, but I can tell you that appears to be, it was almost inevitable for me. It almost had to happen to get me where I needed to go. Now, when I found myself, in that, nuclear-sized crater looking up, I had a choice, as we all do, to shake my fist at heaven and curse God, or beg for help. And I guess we all are going to find ourselves in that place, and that's a test we've got to pass. But to add to that, the thing I think sometimes we conveniently overlook is this is the only place we can do this. This is the only place we can take that checklist of issues we have, present them to the Lord, and ask Him to help us overcome them, and we can do it here. We can. Now, some are going to be a lot easier than others. Some are going to plague us for our life, but if it's like we said here, His intent was perfect. And I think that's where we got to get, that our intent's perfect.
So once we ask the Lord, basically to get the ball rolling, that we want to be redeemed, that this is the most important thing to us, then are we willing to submit our will to His and endure whatever may come our way? Adrian, I was talking to him the other day, and Denver's mentioned that we build the wall between us and the Lord, and He doesn't build it. So why do we build it? If we love Him, if we want to be with Him, if we want to be redeemed, why do we have this wall? And the answer Adrian came up with is fear. It's fear that He is going to ask something of us that is so terrible that we do not want Him to ask. And so we keep this wall up, maybe doing lip service, trying to do His will. But it's not until we completely let go of the fear of what He may ask that He can truly work with us.
My husband and I, a lot of you know, we were just baptized a few weeks ago. And we were given so many promises. My husband turned 70. I'm 65. And the promises that we have received, it's never too late. And the Lord said that we have our purpose, and they might be small, but to Him they're mighty, things that we have to accomplish. And He has promised to extend our lives to accomplish what He wants us to do. And my journey started way back, and it's been a slow, gradual thing. And I think the biggest thing is that what you have inside, what is that final ultimate thing that you want in your life. And what Denver has given me is the possibilities for me, the possibilities of what kind of relationship I can have with my Heavenly Father and my Savior. And that has spilled into our marriage, that has reset the Lord's words, has set things in order for us. And promises have been, my past struggles and stuff have been consecrated to me. And other things have been sealed to me and my husband. And they're things that I never thought would happen. But I relate to this parable because many of the things in this parable have happened to us. I relate to the marriage. I relate having the man having to learn more. And I relate to further in because a similar, almost to just a different place, but almost the same thing happened to me that happens in this parable with the beggar. And so, yeah, you can be my age, you can be John, you can, your life can be reset on the Lord's path.
Right.
And
when we finally get to the point when we're ready to have it.
Yes. So, don't, and Adrian, I was reading your blog, and you had the one about tests and how we have the one test in our lives. And the Lord said I had 5. I passed the first 4, and then I had one more to go. And I emailed you, and I says, how come everybody else has 1 and I had to have 5 tests? So, that's your path is your path, your journey. And it's meant specifically to meet your needs.
Thank you, Karen. Excellent points. I'd like to read just one little part of Denver's latest blog about real intent, and then we'll move on. It says, real intent involves the authentic, complete submission to the will of heaven, because that has become your sole objective. Not to get a reward, not to negotiate some blessing here and now, not to become great in the eyes of heaven, just to have no other object in mind than to glorify God. It is the intent to not be influenced by any other motive but building his kingdom. I think if that was our true intent, then obtaining these missing virtues that we have would be a lot easier, because we wouldn't be pushing back so much.
I had a question before we move past this, and sorry, it's just my my nature to ask the questions. We talked about the need to ask, and when we ask, the Lord can set in motion the things that we are lacking and the things that we need to come closer to Him. Help me understand where in this parable He was asking prior to being tested. Because, okay, so then that makes me wonder. I understand the principle of asking and needing to ask, but is it also possible that the Lord can just see our hearts and choose to give us the tests that we need to help us draw closer to him without us having to ask for it. Because in this parable, that seems to be what's happened.
Adrian?
Well, there's a quote on that in the packet, but the Lord respects agency above all things, and literally above all things. Therefore, there is some need to ask, because we're asking him to screw around in our lives, and we're asking him to do things that we would otherwise, the natural man wouldn't want done. So I think that there is some need for asking, especially if the focus and the desire of your heart is to draw closer to God. If you're not even going to ask for that, then is that really the focus and desire of your heart? But I don't think it has to be a formalized thing where you say, oh, dear Lord, please mess up my life because I want to be bankrupt, divorced, homeless, and jobless. I don't think that has to be the nature of our asking. But I do think that we need to express a desire, and that gives permission.
Right.
Sometimes, go ahead.
The point of this parable, Denver actually talks about, it's in the packet, it says Denver's commentary on the 10th parable. It says, one of the parables in 10 parables shows how the heavens can interact with man, but man may be unaware of the full agenda conducted. I've referred to the 10th parable several times. By the way, that parable is not a description of the test required to obtain the faith for redemption. It is just a parable about how heaven works to provide missing virtue or grace to a life that is lacking something, but still worthy of preservation. So as we go on to this story about how this young man received his missing virtue, that was his story. That's not the point of the parable. It was, this is how heaven interacted in this young man's life, and heaven will do the same for you. But like you said, Turian, asking, yeah, in this parable, it really doesn't talk about the young man asking, but it is an eternal principle that what we want, we need to ask for, and then God can start working with us. So good.
Yeah, I
Just
agree.
because it's not in the parable doesn't mean he didn't ask.
I just find it interesting that it's not in the parable. So I agree that asking is necessary. I just found the omission interesting.
Right.
Well, one of the questions I brought up, or that I've been thinking, is it not possible for us to have asked prior to this life? I mean, if we're not specifically asking now, could we have not asked before coming here for the Lord to intervene?
You know, I had an experience. I'm in the insurance business, and so a lot of my life is signing applications and having people sign applications. And I was having one of those talks with the Lord where it was really happening. You know, it was a real talk. And I told him, I said, you know, if I were to look at my life from today backwards, I don't know that I could have set it up any better to get me where I need to be right now, which is where I'm at. And he said, well, it should. Your signature's all over it. And I thought, well, I know. I made the choices, so my signature's on it. And he goes, no, you signed off on this. Your signature is on your life before you ever came here. And it kind of astounded me. And I haven't really thought about it since that day until now. But I am assuming something, Daryl, that takes place before we come here where we say, okay, you know, here's what I'm lacking. Here's what I need to do. And the Lord says, yeah, I'll make it happen. You know, something like that. And I think that's where we go into what Adrian was saying. I call it God shock, where you're afraid to ask the Lord. You're asking with your lips for help, and at the same time you're going like this, covering your ears because you got God shock, and you're afraid He's going to tell you to do something that is difficult. And anybody sitting in this meeting here has made some decisions based on the Lord's direction that have been painful, that's caused pain in our families and our lives in all kinds of ways. So I think that God shock thing can be for real. You got to be aware of it.
Well, I agree, John, that we definitely, before the foundation of the earth, were sent down here into specific situations to help us out and to help God's plan out. But I do think we still have some responsibility here to make it happen, because we can fail here, even if the plan was set in motion in heaven. Lisa, and then we're going to start moving on with the story so we can get through this.
Yeah, I don't want to speak for everybody, but for myself, I was in a state of apostasy. I didn't know what I needed to do. Denver instructed us what we needed to do in the second comforter. So maybe he's a little different than how we had to do it. I don't know. That's what I would first think. And I just remember reading the second comforter and being on my knees and telling God, whatever you have to do, God, I don't care if I have to work at McDonald's, you know. End up working at a pawn shop, not McDonald's, but I mean, definitely it wasn't what I had in mind for my future if I would have planned it myself. So yeah, I think asking is an important part of it. And when I teach people and talk to them about baptism and they're baptized and they start down that path, I say, asking is a principle. You need to ask to get an answer. So I do believe that's important.
Thank you, Lisa. All right, let's move on to, top of page 95.
Oh, just
Actually,
quick, yeah. You never mind.
Yeah,
You're going there.
so at the bottom of 94 it begins. Adrian, do you want to read that?
So it was that the Lord called his servant and instructed him what he should do. Thereupon the events unfolded in the life of the young man as follows. And not to put words in your mouth, but I bet you're going to point out that went from angels being a nondescript group to a specific servant tasked with a specific job now.
Yep. And so now we're going to read about how...
So would you say the servant is this beggar, I guess, or...
Well,
he's some sort of angel, though.
We're going to find out as we go along. So the story now, it's about how heaven intervened with this man, and there's some amazing symbolism and beauty. But kind of the bulk of what I wanted to talk about, we just did with asking and letting go of our will and God working with us. And then at the end, there is some amazing stuff that we need to go through. So this kind of middle of the story with how heaven worked with this young man, I kind of want to move quickly through it and talk about some key points, and then get to the end where there's a lot of gospel bulk. So could I have a reader for paragraph 8? It's second paragraph on page 95.
I'll read it.
Okay.
One day as the young man was leaving a courthouse in Salt Lake City, he was approached by a very young beggar. The beggar asked for money so that he might buy food. The young man said he had no money with him, which was true. However, the young man did have money in his car, which he did not offer to give. As he walked away, the young man thought upon the beggar, and was troubled that he gave nothing to him. The poor man seemed to be honest, even pure, though his clothing appeared tattered and worn. The contrast between the purity of the young beggar's face and the apparent decay of his clothing seemed odd. The young man determined he would return from his car and give to the beggar. When he returned, the beggar was gone, though the young man searched the area, then the block, then drove about for blocks searching. The beggar could not be found. The young man returned to his office.
Thank you, Cherry Ann. Okay, so we've got our setup here. And this very young-looking beggar, but wearing tattered clothes, approaches the young man and asks him for some money to buy food. The beggar seemed to be honest and pure. I think those are both really interesting descriptions of a beggar. And then the busy, I guess this isn't the busy young man, this is just the young man. Well, nope, I don't have any money. He had some in his car, but he didn't tell the beggar, hey, I've got some money in the car, why don't you come with me?
There was something compelling in the man's demeanor.
That was from the first
Parable 1.
Yep. Okay, let's keep going. That evening, Would someone else like to read?
Me to read?
Sure.
I can read, Tasha, if you'd like. Oh, go ahead.
Jacqueline, go ahead.
That evening, as the young man was thinking of the beggar, he recalled the beggar's face. He wondered if he was able to satisfy his need. Want me to keep going?
Just one quick point. He's already has some remorse that he didn't help this beggar, and he remembered the young face again. And so it's already starting to dawn on him that he messed up. So yeah, keep going, Jacqueline.
Well, I'll add one point to that. I find it interesting that the beggar came to him asking for, in my mind, it would be a token. He would be a sentinel asking for something. And Denver did not, number one, understand, or I'm sorry, this young man did not understand that he was being presented an opportunity to provide a correct, in the government of God, a correct symbol or token. And so so Denver, being pricked in his heart, I'm sorry, I keep calling it Denver, but this young man wondered if he was able to satisfy the need. And it makes me wonder how often holy men we know not of has been among us in a very similar situation, asking us with all the pleas that we make to heaven to teach us how to become a citizen that could not destroy Zion, that we have had opportunity after opportunity to, and we come up short, wondering if we satisfied the need. And I think it's just interesting how this test that this young man is going through also parallels the test of Abraham, when being a very generous man and being very, he would let all kinds of strangers come into his tent and he would feed them. But one of the things that he would require is that they would thank the Lord as they began the meal, and they would thank the Lord when they left his table and give all glory to the Lord. And one day there was a man that came into his tent and he fed him very generously. They started the meal and the man said, "I don't believe in a God and I'm not praying." And he refused to engage in praising and thanking the Lord before they partook of the meal. So Abraham kicked him out and sent him on his way and didn't feed him. And the Lord said, "Abraham, Abraham, have I not allowed the rain to fall upon the wicked?" And and he just goes on and teaches Abraham that he provides for all, regardless of their glorifying him. So Abraham runs out and strives to find this man that he had turned away. And then you fast forward in Abraham's life to the time where he had just had his circumcision and felt there were strangers out there in the heat, great heat wave. And here he was, 100 years old, having just been circumcised and very sick upon his bed. And he just cannot shake this feeling that there's wanderers out there who are in need of his help. So he asked his servants to go out there and look for them. And they also have been circumcised. They're just a little bit on the younger side of the scale. And then when they come back, it's so discouraged and disappointed that they had not been able to accomplish what Abraham had asked of them. Then Abraham gets up off of his sick bed in that horrible heat wave, and he goes out for the balance of the day and searches himself, and he cannot find that which he's feeling so impressed is out there. And it's then that he comes back that the Lord appears to Abraham. And I see so many parallels in these incidences with that beggar at the beginning in Abraham's early part of his 10 tests. And then what happens just before the Lord reveals himself to Abraham. And so I just see that as just another sentinel, I guess. So.
Oh, the parallels, yeah, very remarkable. And I wonder if that had any influence on Denver writing this parable or not.
Yeah, maybe.
Possibly a virtue that all of us need to prove to heaven. I liked your word token.
Has anybody else had this experience? Because I've had the same experience. My husband and I were traveling and we stopped at a gas station and I had $12 in my pocket and I was going to use the restroom. And a gentleman was begging for me. And I know even to this day, and this was several years ago, and I thought, no, I'll go to the bathroom first, go to the restroom, come back, and then I'll give him the money. Came back, he was gone. And to this day, I have regretted that I put my need, I wasn't that big of a hurry, that I couldn't have at that moment. And I think that's the other thing, is the moment. And I had the impression I needed to do it right then. And I said, no, I'll do it when I get back. And I regret not taking the moment that Spirit told me to do it then and not later.
Since this parable gave me a heads up, I give money to every beggar I see.
Absolutely.
That's my experience too. Since I've read this parable, make sure I've got money in my pocket when I know I'm going to the city. It's
yeah. My wife had a disappearing beggar on her once, but she actually gave him some money and then turned around and he was vanished. But what happened to me, I was in Santa Barbara buying gas and I saw an old Asian hobo lady. And I was like, I've never seen an Asian hobo lady, so this has got to be an angel in disguise, right? And so I gave her some money, but I don't think she was an angel. She didn't disappear. So anyway.
All right, let's keep going.
I had a quick question. Jacqueline, can you give a reference for that Abraham story? I'd heard that, but I haven't found it.
Which part? You talking about the one about the man coming to eat at his table, or the one about going out in the desert?
I thought they were the same, but if they're different, I'd be interested in knowing where to find them each.
Do you know, Hugh Nibley is the one who actually recounts both of those stories in his, I believe, Abraham in Egypt book. Hugh Nibley weaves Abraham throughout all of his work, but I'm thinking that it's probably in Abraham in Egypt, or maybe even a lecture. He's actually out in that same desert in front of a tent recounting that to his students from BYU the first time I heard that account. But yeah,
good stuff. All right, top of page 96. For many months the young man would think of the beggar, found himself reflecting on the petition for aid and how he refused. He regretted not bringing the beggar with him to his car and thought it was wrong to refuse one in need. I think this is the Spirit, the Holy Ghost, working on this young man. Hey, you really messed this one up. And the wheels are turning. He's starting to never want to make this mistake again. Some years later, the young man taught a lesson from the Book of Mormon in which the sermon of King Benjamin was discussed. As teacher, he asked, how seriously should we take King Benjamin's instruction to give relief to the beggars? Let's see. In the packet, I quoted King Benjamin's sermon, but I think in the, because of time, I think we will pass on that one. But I'm just curious, when I first read this parable, I was still a member of the church. I believed what the brethren said. Don't give to the beggars at Temple Square. They're just going to use it for drugs and alcohol and blah, 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 blah. And not even really understanding what the Book of Mormon talked about in regard to giving to the beggars. Are we not all beggars, relying upon God all the time? So I know we've talked about this a little bit, but did this parable kind of change your thinking about giving to beggars, about giving to anyone who asks?
Tasha, I would say it reconfirmed what, having read the Book of Mormon, I believed that, but I found no reinforcement for it within the LDS culture for the most part. So when I read it, when Denver wrote that, it was like, yes, somebody finally said that, because I'd always hear the other stuff. Yeah, don't give money to them and they'll just use it for other stuff. And it never resonated with me. And I had experience similar to Karen's, where actually my husband and I were on our honeymoon in Las Vegas, and there was a beggar sitting there out on the strip. And I thought Bill would give him something, and he didn't. And so I should have turned around and gone back, and I didn't. And that guy's face has just been stuck with me forever. So now when I saw that parable, it was like, yeah, definitely a reconfirmation.
I would add too, I think this idea of giving to beggars, ultimately compassion and charity, was a missing virtue. And although we should all take the lesson from it to exercise those things and to give, I bet there are those on this call right now among us who go out of their way to help people, and their life consists of helping people, and this isn't a missing virtue in their lives. So I would say this is an archetype about a process the Lord uses to fix what's broken. So how do we apply it to what's broken in ourselves? What's my missing virtue, and what are the angels doing to fix me where I'm screwed up? And is the bad traffic a result of my incredible lack of patience and the traffic will not improve until I stop swearing at other drivers? I don't know. But anyway, that's my thought is this ain't just about beggars.
Good point.
Thank you. You mean the swearing? No, sorry, go ahead.
All right, would someone like to read the third paragraph on page 96?
I can read, Tasha.
Okay, go ahead, Lisa.
Is it the class responded?
Yes.
Where do you want me to go? All the way down to the young man?
At the end of the paragraph.
Okay. The class responded with comments that beggars should not be encouraged. Most will use the money you give them to buy alcohol, one said. They are violating the law, said another. The class thought the words of King Benjamin may have worked in a primitive society, but in modern societies, the government takes care of welfare needs. People could not be expected to tolerate beggars in their communities and certainly not make them welcome by almsgiving. The young man thought the class was harsh and wondered out loud whether they were wrong. One of the class jeered, "You are a witless liberal."
No, I remember conversations taking place actually in gospel doctrine after reading that section in King Benjamin and the discussion of beggars and the Brethren's stance on it. So Denver's response here, or him relating the class's response, I'm like, yep.
And I again, the beggars being a larger archetype for all of our missing virtues, I think one point we can take is that if heaven is intervening in your life to teach you your missing virtues, the world is going to be shouting 6 times as loud that you're foolish to try to pursue that's not the way of the world, that you'll never get ahead, that you're wrong, you name it. They've got all kinds of good points they're going to make to dissuade him. And the point is, you've got to make an active choice to not listen to what the world says. Because, I mean, right now the world is screaming and burning things down to try to convince us to think a certain way. And if you don't think a certain way, you are wrong. And it's not a value judgment about whatever's being promoted. It's that it is attempting to exercise compulsion and dominion on the souls of the children of men, that you must think this way or you are a fool or evil. And that's what the class is doing to the young man who is being worked with directly by heaven to develop a virtue. We ought to watch for that.
Great and spacious buildings, alive and well, and it's everywhere.
And I tell you, Satan knows our weaknesses, and if that's the way I always knew Satan was attacking me, is it would be coming through my missing virtues. It will give me a little bit more motivation, well, a lot more motivation to know that, hey, I'm not going to allow that. I'm going to stop that right now, and that way I can't be attacked anymore because there won't be any weaknesses to go. That's how I think the protection kind of comes. Whereas, you don't have any more of those weaknesses for Satan to find a window in. And I think you can get to that point at some point in your journey.
Beautiful, Lisa. If you are trying to recognize what your weaknesses are, then you can do that. If you don't care, then yeah, like you said, Satan's going to take over and have a heyday with you. The young man pondered on the lesson and remembered the young face. There's that description of this beggar again, of the beggar outside the courthouse years before. He grew in the conviction that King Benjamin was not talking to another people in another time, but was telling us what we ought to do with the unfortunate among us. But he did nothing with his reflection. So here we see the young man learning more, teaching these things now, reflecting, but not really acting on the mistake that he made. He's still in the process of gaining whatever this virtue was. And we'll talk about what that virtue is later that he doesn't have. It was some years later when the man, no longer young, taught a lesson on the book of Hebrews. As he taught, he came across Paul's admonition to not be forgetful to entertain strangers, because sometimes strangers are really unrecognized angels. The man asked the class, how seriously should we take the suggestion that sometimes angels come among us in disguise? So I'll ask you that question. Have any of you encountered this? Do you believe it's possible? Might this be a way that God works in our lives?
Absolutely.
Well, I don't know if the gentleman I entertained was actually an angel, but my son was with me, and this older man had a sign that he needed a sleeping bag. He was in the driveway of Walmart. I was going in, and so when we went in, I told my son, I said, we've got to get this gentleman a sleeping bag. And so we came back and he was still there. And I was able to sit and talk to him for a while. And what had happened, he had had a heart attack. He was living under some trees. The ambulance had taken him. And when he came back, all of his stuff was gone. He didn't have anything. And he just wanted a sleeping bag so he can be comfortable that night. And he had the most piercing blue eyes. I felt very comfortable around him. And just talking to him, I couldn't tell you whether he was somebody else or anything, but it was a good experience. And so I don't know, but I'm glad I did it.
Yeah, good for you for looking. I go to Seattle once a month for some doctor's appointments for my kids, and Seattle's filled with beggars on every street. Try to make sure I have a few dollars in my pocket for each one of them. But one of the things I do is I try to look in their faces to see if there's this purity, this youngness, this goodness about them that this parable talks about. And I haven't noticed it yet. Not one. They all look like they're, on a different planet, spaced out on things. But
I think the point about coming among us in disguise, I don't think the first beggar was in disguise. I think the second was, but we'll get to that.
Yes.
In other words, if it was the same beggar appearing as a young black man versus a young white guy, now you're in disguise. But anyway, that's a different point.
Very
Go
good
ahead.
Point. All right, let's keep moving. Let's see. Cherry Ann, do you want to read the class response?
Yeah, I'll let Phil read.
I'll read.
Phil needs to wake up so he can read.
The class responded?
Yeah.
The class responded with comments that such things were really allegory. Good people or children are what is meant, said one. Angels do not come and walk about the streets. The idea is preposterous, said another. The class thought the words were written to a primitive, even superstitious society, but modern societies cannot expect angels to be on the loose. But the man thought the class was faithless and wondered out loud whether they were wrong. One of the class jeered, "You are a gullible simpleton."
Thanks, Phil. So this is almost the same response we read on the previous page.
Years before.
Right, years before. And Adrian made the point that, you know, you almost know that what the Spirit is telling you is right when the rest of the world or the popular opinion is something completely different, and they're jeering at you, yelling at you. You are a gullible simpleton. Let's keep going. Another reader. The man pondered.
I'll read.
Great, thanks, Daryl.
The man pondered on the lesson and remembered again the face of the very young beggar outside the courthouse many years before. He grew in the conviction that Paul knew what he was talking about and that angels visited all the people in all times, even when they were faithless. He wondered if the beggar with the innocent face had been an angel after all. The man believed this had been an angel. He determined to never permit a beggar to put up a petition for help to him without response to give aid.
Okay, so it is the scriptures that are tutoring this young man as he thinks about on the mistake he made. First, it was King Benjamin's sermon on beggars and how we should give. Now it is Paul's sermon in the book of Hebrews on entertaining angels unaware if beggars or strangers come to us. And so it's the scriptures that help him in his mind understand, I guess, what he was lacking. And I think that's a point we could all take in our own lives, is that is the point of scriptures. They're to be our personal Urim and Thummim, that as we read, the Holy Ghost will teach us the things that we're missing in our lives and the things that we need to change, the understanding we don't have. Okay, another reader. And thank you for helping me out with reading.
I'll read it if nobody else wants to.
I'll read it.
Go ahead.
Ryan, go ahead.
Okay. So it was that for years the man took deliberate effort to give aid to those who begged. Oftentimes, as he went into the temple in Salt Lake, there were beggars on the sidewalk outside the gates. He never failed to give money to all those who were there. On many occasions, those entering the temple with him would reprove him for encouraging beggars to remain outside the temple gates. They thought this a foolish thing to do. He did not defend his acts, but thought to himself that a great crowd of beggars receiving relief outside the temple gates would be a great tribute to the charity of those who entered in.
Okay, one more, Brian.
Perhaps no greater tribute could be made, he thought.
Okay, so now we are seeing even a little bit more progress in this young man's, well, he's not young anymore, in this man's mind. It said now it was for years that he took deliberate effort to give aid to those who begged. So now he's actually acting on this spirit that's working with him, and he's doing what the Spirit is telling him to do. Whereas before he was just thinking, you know, maybe I made a mistake, here's some things I learned. Now he's acting. He's giving money to those who beg. And
right now, and this is where it's critical for us to now stop and look at our own life and not get misalock on giving money to beggars, but what is going on in our life that the Lord and the scriptures is trying to teach us that we need to work on. Because like Adrian said earlier, it's not going to be giving money to beggars. Maybe one in this whole group, that's going to be their challenge. And it's going to be a lot of other stuff. And so to me, that's where we really got to make sure we take reflection and see where we're at on this path.
You know, what I see when I read this paragraph is I see the Savior on the steps of the temple in Jerusalem, and I see him healing the beggars, giving sight to the blind that are begging there on the temple steps. I see this, and then to have today people walk past them, it sounds like the Pharisees, oh, somebody else will take care of them. I'm righteous. I'm going to the temple, and they're not my responsibility because I'm taking care of my ancestors in the temple, but I don't need to take care of the living.
Good point.
Karen, I actually agree with you on that. I think that after Denver had been presented these two scenarios where he taught out of the Book of Mormon, then he taught out of the Book of Hebrews to these two classes who would not put themselves in a position of being a beggar for the light Denver was bringing to them. So he shifted from sharing the light that he had been gaining to those who were outside the temple wall, who were as little children. They were willing to be taught. They were beggars. So I see that answering the petition of a beggar could be very likened to all those years that he taught out of his home. People would come and listen to him. And that was those who hungered and thirsted for more, that he answered that plea that took him then to the next degree that we're going to go into.
Well, when Zion's established, we're still supposed to go out and gather those. And the parable of the bridegroom, what's he do when the others don't come? He goes out to the street and he gathers those off the street.
Beautiful, Karen. And Jacqueline, yes, thank you. I appreciate all of your insights.
I used to work downtown Salt Lake for many years, and ran across tons of beggars and knew some of them from other walks and in the mental health field that I'd worked in. And I, after a while, I found that I could give to beggars all the time, but I started to just ask God to guide me to make sure that the ones that he needed would get my attention, and even, I guess there's an argument we had in an old elders quorum that if they were giving, they're just going to use it for drugs, and one or two of them I knew that time, some of them were probably alcohol, but after a while I didn't care. I was like, God, if they put my petition out, I would rather give. And whether, and then the angel thing was introduced, and I didn't care whether it was an angel or not. Sometimes if you have it to give, you should just give anyway. It's like, what if it's an angel? So what? To me, it was what was more important to give to those that need it. If I had it to give, and God put them in my path. So anyway.
I think, Brian, that you already have this virtue of compassion and mercy toward others. For some of us, it's a work in progress for sure.
I think my struggle has been to have discernment at times when not to. That's harder for me.
Yes.
That's harder for me because I'd rather give.
I can see that in you. Okay, so top of page 99. But in all this, the man was still not right. He had gained some understanding, but still lacked the virtue he needed. Then it happened. So now we're going to hear about how we know that he has this virtue. It was a rainy day when the man was in a hurry. He parked on the side street of the office building he intended to enter. He rushed from his car around the corner of the block and into the building. Some hours later, he left and returned to his car. As he rounded the corner, however, this time he saw a beggar sitting across the street beneath an awning. The man was not going that way and wondered if he ought to cross the street and give money to the beggar. Okay, so you can kind of see how he's put into a situation, or the Lord has, or the servant that the Lord had called had kind of made this situation that it was not convenient for this man to come and give.
The young man was on his way, and the beggar asked him, without asking, to stop and change course.
So this beggar was not petitioning him. He was not in the way he was traveling. he would have to cross the street and go out of his way to provide money to this beggar. He thought about how he had for some years given money to all who asked. But now there was a man who was not asking him for money. He reflected on what he should do. He sat in his car, sheltered from the rain, and pondered. He remembered the face of the beggar outside the courtyard many years before. There's that face again. He wondered if he failed to give help this day in the rain, if he would not again regret for years the failure to do so. He determined to not make that choice again. So you can see how this prior mistake had caused such remorse and deep reflection in this man that even though this was not convenient, he did not want to feel the regret that he's felt for so many years again if he does not help this beggar, even though this beggar isn't even asking.
And it illustrates that it was not in the way he was going. The then it happened, pregnant phrase there. Then he changed course. What do we call changing course? Repenting.
Yeah.
This is the moment he repented.
I think a change from in his heart to someone who is maybe doing it out of more duty to someone who is doing it out of love and compassion. I think that's kind of the difference here.
Yeah.
One of the things that I thought was interesting is, Denver has mentioned on several occasions that the heavens are open for business, basically alerting us that the heavens are open. The day has arrived that we need to be very cognizant that these angels are holy men that are among us that we're unaware of, are actively seeking those who will. And so the rainy day just testifies of that it's the heavens are open. And then when you couple that with the fact that he's coming out of a courthouse or out of a place where councils gather, it reckons back to the beginning of the story where the council in heaven had made that decision for the Lord to do all that he could. And then it just takes my mind right back to the very first parable where there was a man sitting off to the side that he took notice of, and that he was sitting beneath a tree or at the base of a tree. Well, what is a tree? A tree is a covering and among many other things. But here in this part, he's sitting beneath an awning or a sort of a covering. And as he is going across the street and reflecting on what he should do, it's interesting that he rushed out of the building, but then he takes time to sit and ponder in his car. So he was, it goes back to the thing, the young man was on his way when he caught sight in that first parable and came and sat instead of being on that busy highway or the King's Royal Road, which is another parallel to that. But and he reflected on what he should do. So coming into a place of stillness to reach a conclusion instead of rushing on his way, I think is what gives him a correct perspective to then change his course, go to the corner, stand in the rain yet again, which is another signal that the heavens are open for a light. And, these heavenly beings that are lights guiding us and among us to teach us. But it's just, to me, an indication of that same exact path that every soul who is caught up or lifted up has to, in whatever degree it requires in their life, they have to accomplish.
Okay. Really good parallels, Jacqueline. I love the tree versus the awning. The busy young man in the first parable, and then this man was hurrying. He was in a hurry, but he stopped and thought, no, I'm going to think about this and ponder. And beautiful insights.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so this is the top of 100. The man walked to the corner and waited in the rain for the light to change. I want you to notice the lights. When it did, he hurried across the street and went to the beggar, who sat with his eyes downcast. The beggar had an open guitar case for people to drop money into, but had no guitar. The case was nearly empty except for less than a $50 in change. He had a sign in his hand asking for help. So I guess he was petitioning in a way once he got over there. The beggar was African American, which was unusual in Salt Lake City. He was shabbily dressed and somewhat wet despite the store awning under which he sat. As the man put money into the guitar case, he spoke to the beggar. "I suppose it is good we are having rain, and we ought to be grateful, but I'd just as soon see the sun." The beggar looked up and smiled. As the man turned to leave, he noticed the traffic light had changed and did not hurry to leave. When the beggar saw he stood there, he spoke up and thanked the man for his kindness. Then the two of them, the beggar and the man, spoke with one another for some moments while the light changed and changed again. As the two conversed, the man reflected on how the beggar's countenance seemed to light up as they talked. He noticed too that as they spoke, people seemed to notice how the beggar, seemed to now notice the beggar and to be dropping money into the guitar case. Before it was nearly empty, now there were many dollars being dropped into the case. The man wondered at the change. Do you have any comments?
Lots.
Okay.
Do you want me to?
Yep.
Okay.
I mean, go ahead. Nothing. There's nothing here indicating that John's actually an angel, is there?
Nothing indicating he isn't, I would suppose, too.
That too, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But a couple of thoughts. Tasha pointed out the light, and the light changes. The man smiles. The light changes more. The man's countenance lights up. The light changed and changed again. The light is increasing and increasing. And ultimately, before he leaves, the light has changed 7 times. There's a lot of symbolism there. Secondly, there was less than a $50 in change at the beginning. And now the man wondered at the change with all the money getting dropped into the case. So there's been a great change that's been wrought in the situation. The fact that the man is African American, which is quite unusual for Salt Lake City, I think gives note to the disguise. And later we'll learn more about who he is. But those are a couple of things that I thought about.
Okay, I wanted to comment on that, the light changing 7 times. This is from the Proverbs of Denver Snuffer. It says, "He bears 7 wounds on his person, 2 in his wrists, 2 in his palms, 2 in his feet, and 1 in his side. 7 is the symbolic number of completion or perfection. 7 wounds reflect the completion of his sacrifice, and of that sacrifice's complete perfection." So the light changing 7 times as he sat and talked to this, or stood and talked to this beggar, it shows that finally this man is complete. He's obtained this missing virtue. He is perfect in this thing.
Tasha, it also reminds me of Denver's essay on the road to Emmaus, where he walks with the 2 men, Cleopas and potentially Luke, for 7 miles, and their eyes are holden where they cannot discover who he is until he breaks bread with them. But what's even more interesting about that is where they were headed, and the place that they were headed is also purported to be the same place that Jacob had his theophany experience, and the 7 staircase to heaven was actually revealed to Jacob, was the same place that these 2 disciples traveled with the Lord. And as soon as they recognized him, he disappeared. And I think that same parallel is being drawn out here, that there were 7 cycles or 7 turns that the light increased. And then, but I also find it really fascinating is if he had a guitar case but there was no guitar in it, so he had nothing that anyone would desire. He wasn't something that, he didn't have his harmonica, he didn't have his guitar that would draw people to him. He just had an empty case. But it was the attention of a potential oracle drawing attention to that figure that caused other people to pay attention without any guitar, without any instrument or anything that would make him lovely in this world, that they began to make notice, and that they also wanted to contribute to his presence being here.
How does Isaiah put it? There was no comeliness that we should desire him, or yeah. Very fitting.
I think it's also interesting that in the first and the 10th parable are the only two times he uses the number 7. In all the others, it's 6. Like Lance chipped the bark off the trees, 6 trees out on his path.
First to 6th grade.
Olivia only taught, 1st to 6th grade. So it's kind of interesting.
That is interesting.
All this talk about light, the paragraph at the top of 101 is the two conversed, the man reflected on how the beggar's countenance seemed to light up. There's a hidden message there that he's being tested to see if he has the same light. Denver's even spoken about that. Suppose John was still among us, and suppose he wanted to find out your heart, how could he best do that? Come to you, filthy and rags and need. So the fact that the man is reflecting the beggar's light tells the beggar all he needs to know.
Nice. I know we haven't got to the paragraph where he says his name is John. But all of this talk about this pure face and this young looking face and this kind face, I wonder if that might be a description of John.
Newsflash, it is.
Let's see, where are we at? Okay. The black beggar was from St. Louis and had only been in Salt Lake for 2 days. He hoped to return to St. Louis, but needed money for the trip. He had no wife and had never been married. He did not play the guitar, but could play the harmonica. However, his harmonica had been lost last month, and he hadn't replaced it as yet. His name was John. The conversation was not strained, and the man did not doubt that if John were his neighbor, they would be great friends. He wished John could be part of his life, but realized it could not happen. Right, Jacqueline, you brought up some points about the guitar and the harmonica. He had nothing that people should desire him. Let's see, anything else there?
Well,
One thing that, I was just going to say, I find it interesting that he's using a black beggar here, because to me it kind of reckons back to the Black Madonna being a hidden one that keeps her obscurity hidden from the world. I know it reckons from a more Catholic view, but the fact that it's a black beggar just is an indicator to me that maybe of it being a hidden one, going back to these holy men you know not of.
Going back to Paul's dissertation in Hebrews about
right.
Entertaining strangers unaware.
You know what jumps out to me in the last sentence there? He wished John could be a part of his life, but realized it could not happen. To me, that's indicative of charity, when you sense somebody's spirit and connect with them such that you miss them, even though you barely know them. There's something to me, that's a change in the servant's heart, is that he wished to be a part, and yet he also recognized his life had a different path and different things to learn, but he still had that feeling of knowing this person and wanting to be with them too.
I would add that the beggar was from St. Louis. He'd only been in Salt Lake for 2 days. That's a long journey when you're a beggar and have no money and apparently no means of support. And it's implying that this man, John, had come a long way for a specific purpose. He had just gotten there and he was trying to get back to St. Louis. So he came here to check out this young man, to find out if the young man had what was lacking, and then leave. So go down and return a report is really kind of the message here, because there's nothing that makes sense about this guy being in Salt Lake everything is incongruous. He's got a guitar case, but no guitar. He just got here, but he wants to leave, but he has no money. Nothing fits.
Yeah.
Also, another thing, Adrian, is that a guitar is something you do with your hands, and a harmonica is something that you do with your voice or your mouth. And so, two instruments or two things that would display power for him, he came not bearing them as and they were hidden. They had to be perceived by revelation, basically. That.
Yeah, good point.
All right, so let's keep moving on. The man parted from his friend, the beggar named John, when the light changed for the seventh time. Though they were never to meet again, they would remain friends. Friends change each other. This day, John and the man had each changed.
We got it clear that the man had changed, that, that's the whole thing. That's the whole point. But John changed too, from having encountered this man. And I don't want to take time to go into it, but we ought to ponder what was John thinking and what had changed in him at finally meeting a man who was prepared and complete. If the role of the John who was to tarry, if he wanted to tarry to bring souls to Christ, what kind of a day is this for him to find a soul that he could bring to Christ?
It's the day that heaven rejoices.
Nice.
All right, so it's 9:40. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5 pages left. I'm wondering if we want to continue reading and going like we're going, or if I should just highlight some points. How's everybody feeling for time? And
I'd say let's keep going, and if those people who need to leave, they can leave.
All right.
My vote.
Is that good with everyone else?
Yeah, I'm good with that. I'm recording it, and you can fill in later if you need to.
Okay. Adrian, why don't you pick it up as he returned?
As he returned to his office, he reflected on the difference in the money given to John from before his donation and after. He concluded, however, that it was not his donation which mattered. It was the notice he had given to the beggar. No one paid any attention to John sitting under the awning until he had stopped to talk with him. Then people could see the humanity of the beggar. Before, John was just an object. But when a man dressed in a suit stopped to talk to him, he transformed him from an object on the sidewalk into a human. Want the next one too?
Sure.
He reflected too on how John had seemed more grateful for being spoken with, for friendly notice, than he had been for money. And it seemed to the man that he had gotten more from giving money to John than the money given away. He wondered if all along the money given away was not the best spent money in his lifetime, for he realized all those to whom he had given money were just as much to be loved as John, the beloved. Sorry, did I say that? Beloved.
Be loved as John. Yes. So I think this just goes back to what the parable stated previously about this day. John and the man had both changed. They changed each other. And even though we're separated from heaven, and this veil seems so thick, I think that there are relationships there that we had previously, and if we do chance to meet some of those people here, and maybe it's us being friends with each other, we do recognize each other, and we are both benefited from knowing each other. I think it's just a beautiful thing when you love someone, when you have a connection with them, both are changed. It's friendship, whether it's an angel or just, one of your everyday friends. A regional conference was held, and an evening priesthood leadership meeting was set for the conference center in downtown Salt Lake City. The man came to the meeting, but it was crowded with traffic and he could not park near the conference center. He left his car in a lot of blocks away and walked to the meeting. The sidewalks were crowded with many men dressed in suits, walking in the same direction toward the meeting. When he arrived at the corner of South Temple Street, a crowd waited for the light to change. There we have another light changing. The man moved along the eastern edge of the crowd till he came to the sidewalk on South Temple Street, then skirted along the outside until he could approach the curb. As he emerged from the side of the crowd, the man nearly bumped into an elderly woman standing on the curb, holding a sign asking for help. The old woman did not so much as lift up her face, but stared at the ground for her shame and begging. No one was giving her any aid from the great crowd of men wearing suits.
In the last one, it was the notice people took because a man wearing a suit was helping a beggar. There's something symbolic in that appearance and that suit that he's reinforcing. Twice now he's talked about this great crowd of men wearing suits, waiting for a light to change and ignoring the beggar.
I also find it interesting that they're standing there waiting for the light to change, not acting, versus previously he was acting and the light changed as he was doing the good. These people in the suits who were all dressed the same, going in the same direction on the same path, stood there waiting for something to happen.
Another thing that I found fascinating too is the fact it says a regional conference was held and an evening priesthood leadership meeting. I'm wondering if the first one might be something to do with the councils in heaven and the second to be the councils of men. So they both were convening in order to interact in this old man's life. But also, as the other thing that I found a parallel between the black beggar John and Sarah is they both had their head and their face down. They would not lift their eyes. So it reminds me of the two men who are, the Pharisee and the publican, and how the publican would not even lift his eyes to heaven because of the unworthiness that he felt, where the Pharisee, displayed all of his worthiness before heaven. And I think that's an interesting parallel here too.
Good
Great,
point.
Jacqueline. I love the two meetings. I think there might be something there. A regional conference was held. It doesn't say where. And an evening priesthood leadership meeting was set for the conference center. That's really interesting. Okay, as was his practice, the man had money in his pocket to give to beggars. Since he had encountered but this one beggar, he gave to her more generously by reaching for her hand and putting money into it. At the kindness shown her, the old woman glanced up and said, "Thank you so much." The man responded, "God bless you." And he meant it.
So somebody put out their hand through the veil and tested him to see if he had the token now.
I actually agree with that,
Nice.
Adrian. But what I find interesting is the regional conference is the conference between Sarah and Denver, and they're all walking in the same direction, and that conference is right among all the wolves in sheep's clothing. Are the men in suits? Which one? Just kidding. No, but they were walking in the same direction toward the meeting. So his meeting is with her, and their meeting is inside what I perceive as the great and spacious building. But
so here, their little meeting goes on privately with only heaven aware, and then we get to hear about the great and spacious meeting, which we're going to read about in a minute.
Yeah.
Right, the crowd moved, and the man went with them into the great conference center. There were talks given by church authorities, and all who came were suitably entertained.
Suit?
The speakers' faces were projected onto great screens on the wall on either side of the conference center, greatly magnified to heroic proportions. Overhead lighting dimmed while spotlights shone on those who spoke or prayed or sang, making them shimmer in the artificial light.
The real light dimmed and the artificial light was brought up. Sorry, so delightful. Go ahead.
Yeah. contrasting with the light that changed as he was talking with John and was
reflected
increasing and reflected.
Yeah.
It was a wondrous visual spectacle designed to cause awe for the beholders. When the meeting ended, they all left as they had come. The man looked but did not see the elderly woman nor any other beggar as he left that evening. And I mean, we could go into the conference center and all that, but I think we've talked at that ad nauseum since we've all left the church.
Yeah.
Stopped going anyway. In the middle of the night, the man was awakened and summoned by the Spirit. He was taken by the Spirit back to the place where he had been earlier that day and stood now before the old beggar woman on a deserted street. Right, so he was awoken and summoned by the Spirit and taken somewhere back to the scene earlier that day. As he stood before her, she transformed before his eyes from an elderly beggar woman to a beautiful young personage whom he recognized as Sarah, wife of Abraham and mother of all the righteous. When he saw who she was, he wondered at what this all meant. Right, so we have the beggar transforming. The one that he didn't recognize now is making herself known. And it's Sarah. Curious why you think it is Sarah that needed to see if he had the sign or token that he gave her, and why she was the messenger now.
Hasn't Denver, somebody mentioned it earlier, that women in the next life have a role that's different than the role that we have in this life, or it's I mean, I believe he's even said it will surprise us how flocked everything is, that the woman will be more in a judgment role, and perhaps this was her role, to be the one to test him.
Well, the woman is the one who is to put the man on the throne. And so I think just significant that would be then the one who is judging.
Also, she is the mother of all the righteous.
And mother is capitalized.
What's about to happen is he's about to be adopted into her family, into the family of the righteous. She is going to become, quite literally, his mother. And as Denver pointed out in the Divine Parents Talk, mothers have the right to choose which son gains the birthright, which son is put on a throne, and so on. And so ultimately, she's fulfilling that divine role. She's the one that came to test. So undoubtedly, John returns to St. Louis and reports. I hate to point out that apparently that's where the Lord dwells, is St. Louis. No, I'm kidding.
All the Larsons are from St. Louis.
Yeah.
I drug him to Idaho.
Thank you. But so John returns and reports what he's found. And so then the mother, Sarah, comes to test and verify. And this was the test. And it was now within days that he is in the presence of the Lord. Whereas, well, I'm getting ahead, but we were talking years and years here. This took half a lifetime for the missing virtue to be supplied and for the man to be fixed. But the moment he was prepared, it was within days that the Lord came to him. The Lord,
Adrian,
when it's not required. Go ahead.
Yeah. One of the things that is laid out in Egyptian temple theology through Hugh Nibley is the ceremony of recognition, where that moment of recognition comes. And I think throughout this, the very first one that I noticed was actually back on page 100 when he's interacting with the black. The first thing that he says to him is, "I suppose it is good we are having rain. We ought to be grateful, but I just as soon see the sun." I think he was giving him the correct token of what his intent was down here. And then I think you go to the next paragraph in 104 where it says, he came out of that meeting out of this conference center, and he looked, but he did not see, and he's looking for these holy people that we know not of, but they're not around. They're not part of what he just came out of. They're not to be found. They've deserted that tradition. And then once he, I just think these are points along the path that are kind of indicators or signs that his knowledge has reckoned to such a higher level that when he comes into the presence and Sarah is unholden, or he can actually see who she is, he immediately recognizes her, just exactly like Abraham recognized those three personages who were standing outside of his tent when he came back out of the wilderness searching for those who needed help. He didn't need instruction on who was coming to greet him at that tent door, because they were already that familiar with him. And so for him to, Denver says that when the veil is taken from our eyes, we will be surprised how much the mother has been so present with us, and that at just the flick of a hand that veil is lifted. But the interaction of all these years of striving to gain charity, which is, one of her titles, was that when she was unveiled to him, he was very familiar with who she was, and that's the call of the mother to, according to the pearl, it's the mother who's the last that whispers in the ear, and it's always the first that gathers them back up in their arms. And I think that kind of lends back to this same symbolism that's going on here. Is Sarah is receiving him back into the family. She's the first that he gets received by.
Very good, Jacqueline.
Hey, I'm curious what people think about earlier in the story, the Lord coming back from the council called a servant to then go about the action of testing the young man. So the question is, who would be that servant, given Sarah's the one that told him he passed? Do you think she was the servant? Do you think her and her husband were the servant of the Lord?
Or John?
I think it was John.
I think John was the
You think it was John?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sarah is just the one who's going to bring him into the family now, the family of God.
Right.
And she's the mother of family.
I think so too, because I think John reckons from those who, according to Moroni, are yet still mortal, but they've been changed, so they're here. But Sarah, we know very well, sits on a throne with Abraham, and so they reckon from a different heaven.
Right. So she was most likely probably in the council.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Definitely.
As I was reading this, specifically about that question, it occurred to me that the experience with John was far more informative to the man. And so John, I'm not sure, was there to do the testing so much as he was there to do the teaching and to heal or to help the man learn what he needed to learn. And that it was the woman that actually came to do the testing. The woman tested him, but he was prepared after his experience with the man, having learned what he needed to learn and gain what he needed to gain. That's how I read it anyway.
Yeah, that's where the change actually took place in the young man. And that's where he went from, boy, I don't want to blow it again like last time. Man, I'm going. I don't care if it's raining. I don't care if it's on the side street. I'm doing this. And that's where he changed. Yeah.
Exactly. All right. So Sarah spoke to him and said, "You passed the test." So yes, I think she came here and was the tester. The man, thinking she spoke of his giving her some money, said, "It wasn't much of a test." She responded, "But no one else had mercy." There we finally get the name of this missing virtue. And as they thought about all those who had been beside him in the crowd, none of whom had even noticed her, he was taken by the Spirit back to his home and bed. He awoke his wife and told her of what had happened. She inquired, "What test?" I do not know, he replied. What do you think it means? I think it means you are quite full of yourself, she replied. They both chuckled and returned to sleep. I think this is just an example of kind of what we saw at the beginning of the parable, of them preparing meals together, and, you know, their conversation was filled with mirth and witty banter and quick humor and all of that.
I would add that on more than one occasion, Denver has remarked that he is blessed with a wife who will cut him down to size at every opportunity and keep his native pride in check, and not allow him to be puffed up in any way. And he chuckles about it and acts very appreciative toward it, but he's making a very good point that without her, he'd not be anything that he is.
I don't know if that works in every relationship. Anyway.
Gordon B. Hinckley was cool like that too. He had similar that as well.
In the morning, as he awoke, the Spirit commanded the man to write the account. As he sat down to write, the words were given to him. Where he intended to write about the events of the day before, instead it was given to him to write the following. I have been instructed from on high and have been taught for years. 18 years ago, I failed the test. Today, I have passed. I was confronted by two beggars. With the first, I was going out. With the second, I was coming in. The first was young. The second was old. The first was a man. The second, a woman. The first was outside a courthouse. The second, outside a church. To the first, I did not have charity, but to the second, I did. In the first, I did not know the identity of the beggar, but in the second, I knew her name. The first left me with a lingering guilt, which I have carried until the second left a sense of relief. I'm going to have Adrian comment on this because I won't do it justice.
This morning, Tasha asked me what I made of this, and some stuff came flooding into my mind that I'll share for what it's worth. First of all, this is a great chiasmus, and Denver is very much into the notion of chiasmus, and so he's talking about the bookends, the beginning and the end. But this is also the endowment, and this is if you look at the man Adam, who's been cast out into the lone and dreary world and who's seeking to return to the presence of God, then that puts this whole thing in context. This isn't about just a man earning or gaining a missing virtue. It's about the path we're all on, cast out into this dark place and attempting to return home. With the first, I was going out. With the second, I was coming in. He was cast out and separated from God, and now he is returning to where God is. He's being invited back into God's family. The first was young, the second was old, as was he. The young man and the not young man now. And that's how we all come here. We come here young, we leave here old normally. The first was a man, the second a woman. This is a mirror image of how we get here. We come here by a woman and we're redeemed by a man. So the chiasmus still holds. The first was outside a courthouse. That's justice that separates us from God. But the second outside a church, where he proved to have mercy. And so we have justice and mercy that are juxtaposed with one another at these bookends. To the first, I did not have charity, but to the second, I did. Charity being the final virtue, the pure love of Christ. If you have not charity, you are nothing. So this doesn't, and Denver has verified that it wasn't about a missing virtue. It was about completeness. And since charity is the seal of perfection, what he was really saying is that all things had been set in order now. And at this point, he is prepared in all things. Adam, having been prepared in all things, desires further light and knowledge by conversing with the Lord through the veil. Present him at the veil, says the angel, and his request shall be granted. In the first, I did not know the identity of the beggar, but in the second, I knew her name. All shall know the Lord, ultimately, and all of us need to know the identity. He says, depart from me, you never knew me. Depart from me, ye that work iniquity. Those who claim the Lord's name but don't know him. So it's important that we know the identity of the Lord.
If you're going on with the endowment right here too, when we come to the veil, we don't know the identity of the last name and token, and then it is given to us through the veil, and then we are allowed to enter into God's presence.
I forgot that one. Thank you. Yeah. The first left me with lingering guilt, which I've carried until the second left a sense of relief. We all come here and fall into the ways of sin and death. We all carry this lingering separation from God, and God alone can relieve it. And the only way that's relieved is ultimately to return to God's presence. And so the fact that he carried a lingering guilt is beyond just the notion of, oh, I failed to give beggar to the pure-faced, or give money to the pure-faced young beggar. And so this whole thing, oh, go ahead.
I'd add here that, in the garden, when they partook of the fruit, they realized that they were naked. They had guilt in their nakedness, and they were clothed with the apron to hide their shame. I think that part of returning to God is being clothed to remove your shame.
Great point. And so God bore with him 18 years. That number 18 years, that's a symbolic number. That's not how long this took. That came from the length of time of Christ's preparation, from age 12 in the temple when he wanted to begin his mission and thought he was ready, to age 30 when his mother told him, okay, now it's time to begin. It was an 18-year period of waiting, keeping his hands busy, braiding rope and weaving a net. And so he used that 18 number as a tribute to the Savior. For him, it was actually longer. It was 20-something years.
I find it interesting that Denver's talked about too, and he goes back to Genesis to confirm this, that, at a certain age you're ordained by a man, and then like age 50 has always been a very appropriate age to to become part of God's family, to receive actual priesthood from God.
So the notion of great bookends here. There's a beginning and there's an end. There's a fall, there's a descent, and there's an ascent. And so this is really ascension literature. This is mystical ascension literature that we can completely miss. But this is deep, deep stuff about the endowment and the chiastic structure. And then he finishes, we'll get to this, but he finishes the book as a chiasm. But I'll pause there. We still have the remaining parts to look at, but I'll pause there for other thoughts and comments. Okay. Well, the man had learned the missing virtue.
Within days, the Lord came to him and instructed him further. It's interesting that it took all of these years to learn this missing virtue. And now, just within a few days, the Lord is there. The Lord dressed him in white and gave him further light and knowledge to prepare him. When he had been fully prepared by the Lord, he was summoned into the heavenly council, where he heard unspeakable things. Circles within circles were assembled, the Father being in the center of it all, and great rejoicing took place. The words of Psalm 2:7 were spoken unto him. This day I have begotten thee.
You are my
son. Yeah.
And a couple of notions. The idea that the Lord dressed him in white harks back to the parable of the prodigal son, of course, where the master clothes the returning prodigal in his own robe, puts a ring on his finger and shoes on his feet. And this, I don't think, is merely symbolic in nature. I think this is recording an actual event where the Lord, and Denver's referred to this, that clothing you in clean clothing and presenting you to his Father is the Lord's ministry, along with teaching you what you need to know. And the Lord's ministry then is to bring you to his Father, where you can be accepted into the family of God. The idea that there were circles within circles, but the Father being in the center of it all, brings to mind the temple and the ancient way the temple was organized, with a less holy place and a holier place and a holy of holies where God dwells. You have concentric levels of holiness. And for Denver to be presented before God and have these words spoken to him would require him to be in the center where God is. So taken to the throne of God, taken to the holy of holies. This is all temple. Again, what happens when you pass through the veil? Well, you enter into the presence of God. And that's what the temple symbolizes. That's what this parable symbolizes.
Okay. Tasha, I was going to say also in that last paragraph, he met with the hosts of heaven, and they were as a family to him, and he returned to his wife and made all things known to her. And they rejoiced together at the things they were promised, and waited upon the Lord for their time to come, when they might leave this earth and join the choir above and be, and I find that interesting, one capitalized with them. So it's a title that those are given when they come. Mm-hmm. So this whole paragraph takes me back to the scene of Christ emerging out of the tomb and coming to make all things known to Mary, and rejoicing together at having finished the course and done all that the Father had asked. And if you look at that, then the busy young man and the master in the beginning are literally the same. They reckon from the same household. They're just on a different point on the timeline, but they have the same image. Just and he has just risen up to the degree by which he was required in this round of creation. And he comes back to finish the course by making all things known to his consort, or to his, what makes him in the image of God.
I really like the idea of, Christ coming and reporting, coming back, embracing Mary, his wife, and making all things known to her. I think that's beautiful symbolism here. Now this happened because the Lord determined to preserve the young man and his wife. Whatever the Lord takes in his mind to do, he will do, for the Lord is God. So this couple, the angels saw, that were so excited about to show the Lord to, the Lord did exactly what he wanted to do. He put his mind to it. He sent his servants, and the couple was preserved. So this parable, it needs to be about each one of us. So I think the apt thing to do would be to read it and figure out how the Lord is working in your life, and want to be one that is preserved as well.
I find, Tasha, should I make a comment?
Yeah.
Don't know exactly where this will go, but I've had this question. The first time I read these, and then and that was years ago, and then as we've reread these now, he wrote these. He was still a member of the church. Yes, it was during his ministry, in as far as I understand that, of course. What do we make of the endowment that we, grew up with? I, having had the notion several times that what was contained in the temple endowment was but a tattered ruin of something that Brigham, something Joseph might have, that he started, but really, passed on in bits and pieces to Brigham Young. And I just can't, I'm trying to make sense of what the message really is here, whether, an endowment certainly has progression, points of progression, line upon line is how we learn, precept upon precept. And it's certainly this parable and these parables certainly reflect that. This one in particular, how he, the young man grew from grace to grace, having multiple chances to gain light, to gain knowledge, as we should, and an endowment then certainly is the addition of light and knowledge to each of us, in order to be completed, in order to be perfected. I don't know. I don't know what to make of the way he wrote this, and there certainly are so many similarities to the temple endowment. Is there truth to that? I guess I'm asking. Is this something that now, is this something Denver really understood? Is this from Joseph? What do you guys think?
So you're talking specifically about the endowment?
Yes.
It's a huge mess. I have no idea what's real and what's not. Yeah.
I think we're missing about 2/3 of it.
Yeah. But I take the oath of vengeance I took very seriously to avenge Joseph and Hiram. So.
Oh, good. Yeah. Get right on that.
But the truths that are contained, like what we just read in this book, I mean, that is found within the endowment. The first I was going out, the second I was coming in, Adrian's discussion on all of that, being clothed, finding out, or being given a name, being dressed. So I think we take what we have and learn from that, because there is a lot of truth still there.
I have what's interesting to me, I saw myself always in the beggars that I met. Every beggar that I met, I saw a part of me, and I realized, but for the grace of God, I can be there myself. And then another level of, it's interesting, the family of God all appear as beggars, and they became the family of God because at one time they were beggars themselves. And so we are all beggars. And I think that's part of seeing that lesson of being able to see on the other side, no matter. And the hard thing about beggars is there's usually something, we don't want to look at them because we're afraid of being them. That's what I've found a lot. There's a fear there of and I don't want to be associated with them because the crowd that I'm with could see me associating with the beggars. So anyway, I found there was always whenever a situation like that arises in my life, it's like a constant. To me, I feel heaven closer because they're looking into my heart, and I'm looking into my own heart, and I think it's a good, gracious thing. One other thought too, on a completely different venue. I found it interesting. East St. Louis is Cahokia, and that's where the mounds are, and that's just kind of one of the years ago I understood that. I feel that again, total tangent, but the Book of Mormon likely took place in the Nephites. Cahokia was on top of the Cahokia mound. There's a footprint of a temple that matches kings. It's a similar footprint. There's an outer court, inner court, and I just find that interesting that from St. Louis, so the ancient covenant, John was also probably part of the ancient covenant and from St. Louis. And anyway, so interesting. Just, I don't know what it means. I just found it interesting.
Brian, that to piggyback on that, I found it interesting that he chose two cities with two names the first name beginning with an S, the second name beginning with an L in both of them. And when you brought that up about Cahokia Mounds, I grew up in St. Louis, and we visited Cahokia Mounds and knew about that. And if that here represents heaven, kind of, and Salt Lake City represents the antithesis of it, or the Garden of Eden, or a counterfeit of many, many aspects.
Salt Lake City is the Garden of Eden?
Not the Garden of Eden, the world, the celestial world. I just found it interesting that he chose two cities that are, similar in name, yet very different. Not that in real life they're the same, or that they're
Sure.
very different, but you know what I mean.
Salt Lake, a lake full of salt is dead. There's nothing there that's living. Yet St. Louis, it's saint is in its name, right? It's named after heavenly things.
Mississippi River.
And it's a part of. Anyway, it's fascinating to me. I'm sure there's more there, because on the Cahokia Mounds, they understood the sun and the solstices, and they had different. There was probably a real temple there, or a temple that. Anyway, so anyway, like I said, just interesting.
McCade said, I think that there was only two cities named in the parables. He talked about Cody, Wyoming, and then the Sawtooth Mountains are two areas. But I guess we've got St. Louis and Salt Lake in here too. So yeah, super interesting.
I'd like to just offer a quick word of summary before I turn it over to Tasha to finish it. This notion here, this on page 106, halfway down, God's patience in bearing with me has given me 18 years to learn the great lesson. And that right there is a great lesson to us, God's patience in bearing with each of us. If we'll make the progress, he's in no great hurry. He'll do what it takes. It has all been punctuated as if by two great bookends in these visits by his angels, and God has been there all along. And that brings us back to the first sentence of the book. A busy young man was on his way when he encountered a man sitting under a tree on the side of the road. This chiasmus, the bookends he's referring to, literally are on the first page and last page of the book too. He reminds us that God has been there all along. And the lesson for me anyway is that, as unlikely as it may seem that God's working with me, and that the council has taken any notice, or that anything is happening that's causing me to make progress, I have to take some faith from this, that it really is. In the beginning, he didn't know the angel's name. In the second, he did. There came a point in the first parable when the man looks at him and says, "Do you know who I am?" And he says, "I didn't at first, but now I do." And that is when the Lord asks, "What would you wish of me?" That's a different lesson for a different time. But the thing I take from this is that we all ought to take hope, because whatever the Lord takes in his mind to do, he will do, for he is God. I can't offer a better or more powerful or more hopeful summary than that.
Thank you. To close, I wanted to read something that was basically that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's that was perfect. When at last you have been adequately prepared, you will have gone through exactly what every other soul before you has experienced to prepare them. There are no shortcuts. There are no exceptions. It is in accordance with laws ordained before the foundation of the world. Everyone who has obtained what you seek will have done so in conformity with the very same laws. The Father will work with you to prepare you to receive what you seek. This is a reaffirmation by Christ of the process and the Father's role in bringing it to pass. If you trust him, trust also his Father's deliverance of you. You will be delivered. You will receive from him who knows how to bestow every good gift what you have asked of him. And so I echo Adrian's sentiments that whatever the Lord does, choose to make happen, he will. So I hope we'll all just go forward with a little more faith that he's working with us. And if we can let that wall down that we've built and let go of our fear, just trust him and be willing, whatever we fear he may ask of us, to let that be filled with love instead, that we can become like this young man, and maybe by Sarah, given a place in God's kingdom, and all of this life and all the sorrows will have been worth it.
Back to you, Cameron.
Thanks so much for your preparation and for presenting this. That was wonderful. I learned so much. That was awesome. I'll echo some of what's been said about just doing what the Lord asks you to do. This whole experience, the parables, is I put it off for several months after the Lord asked me to do it, and ultimately I gave in and said, "All right, let's do this." And there were circumstances that made it doable, and it's a relief now that it's over. It's been a delight to participate. I've learned things that I didn't expect to learn, and I think it's accomplished some real important things in my life. I expect in your life as well. I've heard from many people that have been touched from different experiences, different sessions, and what they've learned individually. And it's I think it's well, I couldn't say it better than what Denver did. He said, "My purpose in writing 10 parables was to take an ancient literary form." No, I'll get through it. Sorry, I'm emotional. I don't know why. "My purpose in writing 10 parables was to take an ancient literary form and use it to illustrate the path back to God. It was intended to replicate the underlying meaning of the temple endowment, but without employing theatrical presentations, signs, tokens, or keywords. Instead, the process is portrayed through parables involving characters in the stories moving from a state of disassociation with God through understanding his attributes and manner, adopting his virtues and conduct, then back to a reconciliation with him, at last reaching his presence by satisfying angelic sentinels and obtaining his tutelage." No, this is the temple, right? This is exactly what he intended to do with this. He goes on and says, "This book is actually one story. It's the process of redemption. It was written to be readable in the same time as it would take to attend a temple endowment session. However, its meaning can take many days of reflection to fully unlock. It is intended to provoke action or changes within the reader who sees the messages. Some people have seen the value of that little book and as a consequence have gained some considerable benefits in their own search into the mysteries of godliness. Others have regarded it as nothing more than a little storybook, and I suppose gained varying degrees of entertainment from it. We are all entitled to see as much or as little as we choose to see. That is the beauty of communications that employ symbols. It does not force the listener to understand a thing, it only invites." It was a few weeks ago that paragraph there really hit me. The book is actually one story. It's the process of redemption. it is intended to provoke action or changes within us. I think that the success of the book, the success of the stories of the parable is demonstrated in how we respond to it. What do we learn? How do we react? What can we do to move forward in fellowship and love, showing and demonstrating the virtues of godliness towards each other, making positive experiences and affecting change in each other's lives as we grow and learn together. That's been by far the most important part of all of this for me. And I hope that that is an important and lovely aspect that everyone who's participated obtains as well. It's been an honor to do this. It's been a privilege to be involved with it. I'm glad that we've made it through, and many have asked if there will be future discussions and future parables. I hope there will. I don't have plans to do anything more like this. I had a fairly specific task, and that's been now completed. But that's not to say that this needs to end. So I have gained a great love for all of you. Everyone who's presented 10 parables and 10 different presenters, everyone who's contributed, the faces that I've seen every week, the names that I've learned, and the people that I've grown close to. Thank you all so much. You've made me a better person, and I thank you greatly for that. So with that, we'll bring this to a close and hopefully continue the discussion online and wherever else this may take us. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Much
Night.
love to you all.
Night,
Good night.
everyone.
Until we meet again.
Yeah.